Welcome to another edition of From the Front Lines, where we discuss both the day-to-day and one-of-a-kind issues facing real estate managers. Our topic today is the Commercial Real Estate Momentum Index. I'm here with Brian Bailey of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Brian, I understand that the Atlanta Fed maintains a CRE Momentum Index. Can you explain what this is and how can people access it?
Yes, Suzanne, and first, thank you for the invitation to join you today. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts on commercial real estate. And just for sake of clarity and transparency, these are my thoughts and not necessarily those of my esteemed colleagues at the Atlanta Fed or at the Federal Reserve. But really, to talk about, the commercial real estate momentum index, I may refer to it interchangeably as CRE, but certainly it is, the Atlanta Fed has put a significant amount of resources into real estate in general, whether that's commercial or residential. And so you can go to the Atlanta Fed's website where the commercial real estate index is housed. Sometimes there's so much good information out there, it can be crowded. And so you may go for the easier route. One that I take sometimes is just to put it in my browser as far as the Commercial Real Estate Momentum Index and the Atlanta Fed. But the index really is kind of built around kind of the premise of trying to assess momentum and whether it's accelerating or declining in the commercial real estate space. We have data on over 390 markets. That doesn't happen often, that you have that wide a data set. Obviously, I'm covering not only the large gateway markets, the secondary, tertiary markets, but I am covering, many markets, both big and small. You don't usually see data for markets in Alaska, markets in Hawaii, and we have all of those states covered in addition to the 48 continental states in the continent. We cover right now the four main food groups, whether that's multifamily, industrial, retail, office. We are in the process of adding hotel data, and then kind of to take it a step further, kind of the premise of the index is really to look at commercial real estate and break it down by various variables and try to assess the impact on the health of commercial real estate. Those variables, those inputs, cover both current results like vacancy, occupancy, rent growth, the standard variables that you see in commercial real estate, but it also includes some of the forward-looking dynamics. For instance, take retail. We've included retail sales growth. We've included non-store sales divided by total retail sales. We've included construction forecasts. Switching to office, we've included variables such as, office using employment, the growth of office using employment. So really, we're trying to cover both the current state, but we're also trying to look at some of those individual variables that we know from that correlate well to the commercial real estate, that they're the drivers of commercial real estate. And so from that standpoint, we're trying to assess the momentum in the various markets.
And it really is a wealth of data. To that end, how does one interpret the results that are shown in the index? I see a lot of color coding. Can you explain what that indicates?
Absolutely, and it's kind of like Mission Impossible because I'm going to try to describe something. Visually, it's much easier to see, so I'd recommend going to the website. But think about, if you can picture kind of the standard bell curve that many of us that our grades in college were put on, and you think about you have the folks that break the curve and they're on one tail, and there's a couple of those folks that, always seem to, pull 99s or 100s out of the hat. There are also folks on the other end of the spectrum, who struggled pretty dearly. And so you have the tails on the ends of the spectrum, and in the middle, you have kind of the main group of folks, that fall around the average. And that's kind of how our information works. So we have 20 to 30 years worth of data, and it's grouped by result. And so you have a cluster around the midpoint, around the long-term average, and then it falls off as you move away from the center and toward the ends. And really kind of as far as the color coding is concerned, so if you look at the left side of it, you have, results that fall way outside of the long-term average, but they can be viewed as negative. For instance, let's use rent growth, and let's say that the office market that we're looking at generally has long-term average rent growth around 3%. Well, in this case, the outliers might be -5 or -8% when you have dynamics associated with too much supply or a recession, that kind of thing. So you've got blue on the left side of the spectrum, so momentum is decelerating. In the middle, around the long-term average, is green. We thought green was a safe kind of color. And then you move to the other end of the spectrum on the right, on the tail to the right, and you think about back to our example where long-term average rent growth is 3% in this office market, and what you might have at the tail on the right-hand side is you might have 8% or 10% or 12%. You might have some very, very strong rent growth on that standpoint. And we've designated that in orange. And what we're kind of thinking is that, on the right-hand side, as the market is heating up, as you're seeing those results, potentially, that creates more volatility and more risk. Because you think about it, the probability that the results next time, if they're 12%, odds are they're probably not going to be 12% in the next quarter. And so there's some volatility, there's more risk. The same thing on the other end of the spectrum when it's in blue. You think about, declining rent growth certainly creates hardships and stress for owners, for investors, for lenders. And so from that standpoint, you have risks associated with those kind of very low results on that end. So what we're trying to do is we're kind of highlighting the risk. On one end, you've got blue where the momentum is declining, it's too slow. On the other end, you've got momentum in orange where it may very well be, overheated from that standpoint. And so that's kind of the basis for the color coding.
So the benefits of this tool seem just endless. How could it be valuable in particular to real estate managers, owners, asset managers, our membership?
Well, I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. And we are constantly striving to improve it. I think, some of the benefits that we're doing. So, one, we're trying to kind of take, for instance, we have current dynamics, i.e. current occupancy rates, current occupancy trends, and marry them with some of the variables that are going to impact those occupancy trends, occupancy rates in the future. For instance, job growth. If job growth is accelerating, then we may very well see the ability to pay more in rent, and occupancy may very well increase. At the same point, we certainly have to keep an eye on supply, because as we've seen, in several segments in past history, when we're in some of those pretty robust times, you may have the tendency for overbuilding to occur. And so from that dynamic, we have to watch a number of variables that have implications for how these local markets will be impacted in the future. And I think that kind of touches on, part of the premise of our model is, commercial real estate, the performance of it is driven by, a component of the national economy, a component of finance, is the capital available, because we are in a capital intensive business. But additionally, there is a very sizable local component. We all joke about location, but you think about right now, if you are in a market in the upper Midwest, or you're in a market in the Northeast, or you're in California, and you're seeing population growth slow, or in some instances decline, that certainly has implications for commercial real estate. At the same point, it's probably a benefit for some of the markets here in the Southeast and in the South Central and some other areas. But certainly, we can see, some of that dynamic playing out in the results here. And so I think that's one of the, those are some of the, significant benefits. One of the other things is, this is probably one of a small handful of tools that you can pull up a map of the U.S. You can go to our website, pull up the map of the U.S., and you can see that we've provided the results, our thoughts on momentum in 390 large and small markets. So on one hand, I've not seen a lot of tools that showcase it on a national level, and secondly, not aware of a lot of tools that provide, information on Elmira, New York, on Alaska or Hawaii, on markets in Alaska or Hawaii that we've talked about. And so from that standpoint, I think that, we're trying to summarize and provide the information succinctly, as well as provide it both at a scale as far as large markets and small markets.
Wow, really great intelligence that could be used by our audience. So these tools tend to evolve over time, of course. What enhancements are being made by you and your team right now?
Right. And so one of the hats that I wear at the Fed is that I am looking for risk in the commercial real estate space. So we're looking at it on a number of fronts, whether it's economic, i.e. job growth, retail sales. The variables are endless. We are looking at it on some of the standards that we all know and love in commercial real estate, vacancy rates and construction forecasts. We're also looking at it from a capital and financing perspective. So we're trying to actively gauge the implications on kind of the safety and soundness of the banking system, how the current lending environment is impacting that. And so as risk evolves, we are continually evolving this tool. One of the things that we're working on right now is we just received access to a vendor's hotel data. And so from that standpoint, we're working through some of our thoughts and our methodology and process to incorporate hotels. That's one of the larger initiatives as far as this tool is concerned. But there are a number of smaller enhancements that we continue to make. We continue to assess and gauge whether we're going to add new variables that certainly, to be added, have to have an impact on the economy and commercial real estate. So there are a number of enhancements that we're actively assessing at this time.
And what is the tool showing right now in terms of a macro view of these asset classes? Is there anything you'd like to spotlight? Where are some of the hot markets, distressed markets? What are you seeing right now?
Right. Well, certainly, we've been blessed to see a rebound in commercial real estate out of, the dire implications for contracted economic activity. And so from that standpoint, let's start with the easy sectors, in my opinion. I mean, you look at multifamily right now, and certainly multifamily appears to be very robust. Occupancies appear pretty tight. We know that single-family residential, which does factor into multifamily performance, is experiencing very strong growth, making that sector and that option less affordable. Additionally, we had a shortage of affordable housing, of multifamily affordable housing, and affordable housing in general. And so from that standpoint, there are not a lot of substitutive decisions that can be made for housing. And so my expectation is that multifamily will continue to experience, robust dynamics in the near term. Some of the operators have told us that 2021 is going to be arguably their best year in the last 3 decades as far as effective rent growth, because last year they had offered significant concessions. The market has turned dramatically. They're no longer offering concessions or sizable concessions like they were last year. And so not only have concessions evaporated, but they're seeing increases in asking rent. So my expectation is multifamily is going to see some robust dynamics in the near term. I do have some questions. Some questions are kind of growing in my mind as far as the housing industry is concerned, as we appear from the single family perspective to seeing starts accelerating, and certainly that could lead in several years to some kind of localized oversupply conditions. But right now, I think multifamily is very robust. If we switch gears to industrial, obviously, as we sheltered in place, it seemed that all we could do was buy product, and we saw e-commerce sales growth spike by the likes that we've never seen before. In some instances, it was up 25 and 30%, which is just very, very sizable, even compared to the run-up that we saw prior to the pandemic. One of the things we expected to materialize is once we saw reopenings on a wider scale. Some people have called it revenge spending, but there certainly has been a rush to make in-person purchases. They have materialized at bricks and mortar retailers. So we've seen a pretty sizable uptick in growth there. At the same point, over the last few months, e-commerce sales growth has remained positive, even in light of that acceleration of in-person purchases. E-commerce has slowed somewhat, but the growth remains positive. And so from that standpoint, I think that we'll continue to see, some pretty vibrant dynamics out of industrial, and certainly, technology continues to work hard at shifting consumer buying habits, and we'll continue, to see, in my view, we'll continue to see, some of those dynamics influence commercial purchases going forward. One of the areas your audience may very well be very interested in is, return to work and what impact that's having for office. And we're starting to get into some of the sectors that it's more of a challenge to kind of forecast what's going on. But I'm watching it as well as a number of others, and watching it with keen interest. The good news is we've seen a pickup in office activity over the last couple of quarters. We've seen offices that have reopened. Some of that momentum is picking up, but it's still well below the long-term average. Part of that pickup is the fact that offices have reopened. Part of it is people are returning to work. Part of it is the fact that, the economy is adding a sizable amount of jobs, and some of those jobs are being added in the likes of professional and business services, which in finance, which are sectors that predominantly use, office space. And so from that standpoint, our model is picking up, which it should, some of that increase in employment in those areas. And you think about, once we kind of get through and remove some of the uncertainty around COVID and the new Delta variant, et cetera, we're having more folks getting those people back to work, and certainly that should bode well for office space. I think additionally our model is picking up, our index is picking up, the rate of new supply exiting the pipeline appears to be slowing. And so while there's still a significant amount of uncertainty, while the anticipation is that the number of folks and the cadence that they return to work will vary from what it was pre-COVID. Certainly I think that as we're adding jobs, the net effect is that we'll need office space. And so from that standpoint, I think, the index is showing that momentum is still challenged compared to the long-term average. So it's showing up in a number of markets, in a significant number of markets in blue right now. At the same point, we begin to see that come off of the floor, which is good news for office from that standpoint. And last but not least, talking about retail, I think that from that standpoint, retail is facing mixed results. If we kind of break it down, the sellers of goods continue to face strong headwinds from e-commerce. They've faced very, very significant challenges. We've seen a number of those firms that have gone bankrupt, a number of those retail firms that have gone bankrupt. Now, some of the firms have embraced an omni-channel strategy, and they have fared better than those that didn't. The sellers, on the other hand, sellers of services continue to be okay. Their businesses have held up, and in some instances done better, experienced better performance during COVID because they were able to shift their strategy. For instance, you look at the amount that the amount of spending that the American public did on takeout, skyrocketed during the pandemic. You look at the legislation that came through that allowed a number of these restaurants to sell a very limited amount of alcoholic beverages. So certainly, some of those trends have, helped the sellers of services, their businesses hold up. At the same point, retail is burdened, I think, in two respects right now, and hopefully it's short term, but there's pressure finding good labor. And I think that as we see the return of the school year, as we see less uncertainty around the pandemic and the associated waves, as we see child care, safe child care coming back, then certainly we will see labor coming back. Additionally, be remiss, we know that some of the enhanced unemployment benefits are expiring, which also should send some labor back to the marketplace, to the industry. So that should be, I think, a short-term challenge that may begin to moderate a little bit. At the same point, overall, we know this, and we knew going into the pandemic, retail continues to be burdened by an excessive amount of space, and additionally, consumers have arguably the lowest switching costs of any industry in retail. And so from that standpoint, those are kind of two longer-term dynamics that will continue to create headwinds, in my view, for retailing for years to come.
A really great touch point for where we are at the moment. Of course, we all wish we had a crystal ball. Are you willing to make any predictions about any future momentum of these asset classes?
Well, that's a great question. I think when we look at multifamily right now, certainly with the accelerating price increases in single family that we're seeing in many markets right now, that is making affordability that much more challenging for single family residential, which means that renters should stay in place for multifamily because there are limited amounts of available product, especially in the B and C class space. So from that standpoint, I expect for the near term that multifamily will continue to do well. As I talked about earlier, I do think that moderate term, we could see some localized overbuilding in single family, which may kind of make that product class more affordable, which may induce some of the renters who have the capital available to buy a home, which may cause occupancies to decline. I think office. I'll talk about the gateway markets because there's been a lot of press. That's been pretty hard on the likes of New York and Boston and Chicago, San Francisco, and a few others. I do firmly believe that the gateway cities will be back. I do believe that technology is allowing workers as well as businesses to be more mobile. And from that standpoint, I think that areas of the country that have high cost structures will be pitted against areas of the country that have low cost structures. It will be easier to do that because of that mobility. And from that standpoint, I think that the higher cost areas are going to have to take notice and certainly look at a strategy to try to keep these workers and some of these businesses in place. When you look at what we've seen in the last couple of years as businesses have moved out of several Northeast markets toward the likes of South Florida as well as several other destinations. And so from that standpoint, they're looking for areas in the country that have a lower cost structure. So I think that will, weigh on office. I think the gateway cities will be back. I think what will happen is that the rate of absorption compared to the long-term average will be lower because of some of the businesses moving out of those areas. So I definitely think the cities, the gateway cities, will be back. I just think that the rate of absorption will be lower. And we talked about retail. I think that the segmentation is going to be more bifurcated. Sellers of goods will continue to face pretty strong headwinds from the likes of e-commerce, from the likes of this excessive amount of space that we built, over the last several decades, and certainly low switching costs, the consumer switching costs, also have implications. At the same point, some of those dynamics are not going to impact your local takeout venue. They're not going to impact the list of experiential retail, local experiential retail, whether that's the movie theater when we come back, whether it's the entertainment venue, whether it's nail salon, tire store, etc. I mean, a lot of that just cannot be replicated by e-commerce. So I think you'll see kind of bifurcated results in that space.
It makes a lot of sense. Brian, thank you so much for these insights. What a great breadth of data this index provides, and all at no cost. Again, the CRE Momentum Index, CRE, can be found at atlantafed.org. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate you having me today.
Visit irom.org for more knowledge to take on real estate management's most dynamic challenges. That's www.irem.org.